Hello, in this short little walkthrough I'm going to go through the new version of Divisimate, version 1.2, and just talk about the new functions it has to offer. So those of you who have used Divisimate, you'll have played with it before and you'll have an idea of what it does. For those of you who haven't used Divisimate before, this is a little application that runs in front or before your MIDI instrument reaches your DAW or your digital audio workstation to play virtual instruments, and it'll subdivide up your polyphonic note playing and send them to different MIDI outputs in order to play different instruments using polyphonic notation. So for instance, here on the screen I've got a piccolo, a flute, an oboe and a clarinet being played in a 3-note polyphonic setup where the piccolo is transposed up an octave. So if I play a chord, you'll hear the clarinet down the bottom because the clarinet is rooted to note number 3 in the chord. You'll hear the oboe in the middle because that's root number 2, and then you'll hear the piccolo and flute up the top. But what if I wanted to play a melody up the top? At the moment, with the settings that Divisimate uses, it always prioritizes the lowest note. So if I only play 2 notes, the piccolo and the flute don't play. It only plays the clarinet and the oboe. But I may want to prioritise the piccolo or the flute because they've got a nice high tone and I want them to stand out. So the new mode down here, Divisimate, you can set bottom up or top down. So now if I play just 2 notes, it plays the piccolo and the flute up the top, and then the oboe as a second note. And only when I introduce a 3rd note does it bring in the clarinet. So that's a really good new mode. It allows you to focus on the melody line at the top rather than worrying about trying to remember to always play, for instance, 2 notes or 3 notes. But on that score, there's also another fantastic new function. And this new function is the fill voices function. So let's go back to that same problem. You're recording a whole load of stuff and you accidentally forget you're supposed to be recording a triad and you only play 2 notes for a small section of the music. Well, rather than it just ignoring the fact you're playing 2 notes instead of 3 and not bothering to play the 3rd, this is kind of the lazy man's orchestrator. If I just play 1 note, it plays all 3 instruments, essentially, the clarinet, the oboe and the flute and piccolo combination. If I play 2 notes, well, what it's done is it's filled the clarinet, and it's given the clarinet, actually in this case, the 2nd note. So it's playing all 3 instruments, but I'm only playing 2 notes. Then if I play a 3rd note, it brings in the clarinet and takes the clarinet down to play that lower melody. So what it's doing is it's listening to what you're playing, it's analysing what you're playing, and it's filling in the gaps if you forget to play as many notes as you wanted to. And I think that is an incredible new feature because that'll really, really help get things going in your composition. The other cool new feature of version 1.2 is to turn on or off the transposition modifier for any of your zones. So for instance, you can turn off the transposition for low zone or melody zone or the zone in the middle. So to do this, you click on the transposition button and you can choose to ignore here the low, the melody or the voices. So I'm going to turn off the low. So it's only going to transpose any input that comes from my polyphonic input or my melody input, but it's not going to transpose anything that comes in from the low. This means you can use key switches. So let's turn off the low transposition. So I've got this lovely string orchestra set up here with double basses pitched down an octave, cello, viola and violin 2 at pitch, and then violin 1 pitched up an octave. So if I just play a standard triad, I get this lovely, lush, big string sound. But I want to use key switches. I want to be able to switch between those lovely legato sounds to spiccato, etc., etc. But if you leave transpositions affected by this low zone where the key switches are, it's going to muck up. So the clever people at Divisimate have thought of this. We can turn off this low, activate the low zone, and send it to all of our outputs, and therefore now the key switches will work across all of our instruments, irrespective of the transposition that's occurring with your polyphonic input. So let's play the legato. And then switch 2. And back to legato. So it's really good. You can use your key switches. I'm using a Stream Deck for my key switches, but you can use all of the articulation switches now within Divisimate without any worries about transpositions occurring. Of course, I'm lucky here in that the Spitfire Symphony Orchestra string sections all use the same key switches. Obviously, if your instruments use different key switches, there's no point in using a universal controller like this. But for some of the instruments, it works very well. So that's another cracking new feature that they've introduced.